Welcome to TriloTalk. This is a podcast dedicated to topics that we think are important to the profession of medical writing. And our goal is to bring topical issues to the forefront and hopefully spark conversations in the wider domain about these issues. This is Forjanic Klapproth. I'm here today with Joan Affleck, and I'm very happy to be talking to her about the importance of training programs for medical writers. I've been training medical writers for over 20 years. Trilogy hired its first novice medical writer in 2003. And since then, we've taught both new and experienced writers the trade of medical writing. And this is a topic that I think is essential for the medical writing community and the industry as a whole to be talking and thinking about, which is why I wanted to bring it onto the podcast. But before we dive into the idea, Joan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Julia. Love to. My name is Joan Affleck. I'm head of the medical writing department at Merck. I joined the company 6 years ago to start a medical writing department for the company. And the department has grown from an N of 1, me, to about 200 people now. Wow. And as part of that growth, it became clear to me that I would need to build from the bottom up and begin training medical writers.
Yeah, that was very similar to the realization that we encountered as we began to hire people initially. We've grown from that first person we hired in 2003 now to about 80 people. And in the beginning, you have one or two people and they just kind of work alongside you. And that was already a form of an apprenticeship. But as the group got bigger and bigger, we needed clear structure in place to say, how are we going to make sure that everybody we bring on board is really learning what they need to know? So actually, I'd like to just step back for a moment and maybe throw out there, why is this an important topic? Why do we think we need to be talking about this and getting everybody thinking about it?
So there are a couple of things that come to mind for me, Julia. One is that, as all of us know, there just aren't enough medical writers. So, yeah,
absolutely.
Even
though there's tens of thousands of them, right? We know there's not a few.
No, correct. Yeah, but we still need more. The other thing is that the way one becomes a medical writer is not by, going to a graduate school program and studying in a classroom and getting a degree. It's great to have some academic background, but you really have to practice the craft of medical writing. You've got to have hands-on activity. And so that's why it's essential that people are working in the field and learning as they go.
Right. And I think that's why this idea is so important, because certainly for the last 20 to 30 years, the way most people learned how to be a medical writer was the sink or swim method, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but that was definitely how I learned. I got hired straight out of my PhD. I was given a computer and an office, the ICH guidelines, and said, kind of, go write a CSR. And, I just kind of had to make it up as I go along. They gave me some examples that I could look at, some of them better than others probably, but that was it. There wasn't actually a training program at all.
Right. Yeah. So we, of course, we want to set people up for success, right? We want them to have a positive experience of working in medical writing. And again, that's why it's so important to put that framework around it. We've used two essential things to help build our framework. And they're things that are available to anyone who's interested in creating an apprentice program. One is the Drug Information Association's medical writer competency model, and that can help people shape what level of medical writer needs to learn what skills and what
Right.
the expectations are. So
Yeah.
that's been really helpful to us. We've adapted it for our own company needs. And then we partnered that up with the educational outline that the American Medical Writers Association has. And that has given us some form to what
Hmm.
we've developed as a year-long program of intensive training with practice before we kind of launch people into a semi-independent project.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me a little bit more about that program then. So you hire people from scratch,
Mhm.
and maybe walk me through what that looks like.
Yeah. So just the hiring process is really interesting because, as many of us have experienced, you want to break into medical writing, but it seems like all of the job adverts are requiring
Yes.
some experience. Well, then how can you get the experience if you can't get in there and get it? So we decided we would take the risk, and actually, it's not that much of a risk, to hire people without any experience. And in our initial foray, we opened 3 positions. We had over 200 applicants for those 3 positions. So
Right.
there is this wealth of wonderful candidates out there, people who are
Mhm.
clamoring to learn to be medical writers. Um, we brought
Which
them
is
in.
which is a positive thing, isn't it? I mean,
Absolutely.
we're not starving for potential out there.
No, no,
Yeah.
there are riches. And
Yeah.
so again, anyone who wants to do this, you can do it. You can be successful with this kind of a program. So we brought in our first 3 candidates. We call them a cohort,
Mhm.
and
How
they
long ago? How long ago was that?
about 18 months ago now. Yeah,
Okay. Okay. Hmm.
and they had sort of module learning about different aspects of medical writing. Since they didn't have any experience, we wanted them to get sort of the holistic view of everything that goes into it. So they
Hmm.
spent time with our safety group doing some narrative writing, and they would learn, but then they also got to practice,
Hmm.
doing the work themselves. They spent time with our informed consent team, different kind of writing, different audience. Again, they learned and they practiced, and they rotated through several different groups in our department so that they could get a feel for what it's like to be writing this kind of document, writing that document, doing some quality control, all those kinds of things
Mm,
before they launched into writing for a therapeutic area, for example.
I see. Okay. So we do something fairly similar. We start our writers out on simpler tasks, working alongside or under the wing is probably a better way of describing it, an experienced writer. And they will do things like narratives, um, filling in the methodology part of a CSR, maybe doing something very simple in the results section of a CSR, like the demographics, or even just filling in tables. It's interesting how something as mundane as that, for somebody who knows nothing about how these documents are structured and where all the information comes from, just having them fill in some tables means they have to go in and see the TFLs. They have to learn which pieces you pull out, pay attention to footnotes and all kinds of things like that. So we also have them doing very simple things like that for about the first 6 to 12 months. And
Mhm.
only after that do they start to do more complex pieces of writing,
Mhm.
always under the guidance. So they're never responsible for a document. We don't believe in the sink or swim concept for training people at all. And that means there's always somebody there who's looking at what they're doing, first telling them what they should do with that piece that they've been asked to write. Then they go and write it. Then that lead will look at it, give them guidance, and tell them what they should do differently, that type of thing. So
Mhm.
it's a very guided process all the way through.
We do the same kind of thing when they start working on, real documents. And I like the way you talked about, having kind of a stepwise approach so that they get appropriate assignments, nothing
Yeah.
that's going to be overwhelming.
Mm.
And we've found that we actually take a look at our portfolio and say, what are documents that are coming up that would be appropriate for our cohort folks?
Yeah.
And, we kind of reserve those experiences for them so
Yeah.
that they aren't feeling like overwhelmed by the complexity of a document.
I think that's essential. It has to be part of the planning concept, because otherwise you're going to end up throwing people onto documents that they just don't know how to handle, and everybody will come out burnt, right? So
Right.
we definitely, as part of our resourcing process, we do the same thing. We say, oh, we've got, these 5 narrative projects coming up, or we have an IB update. IB updates are another good place to get people sort of introduced to the different types of documents that are feeding into the IB, right?
Yes.
And we earmark them for the new group. We call, you call yours a cohort, we call ours the class of 2020 or something. And we also usually hire about 5 new writers a year. And we try to have them go through the process as a group, because we want to build this sense of team and camaraderie, that they're learning together. They can also ask each other questions, and maybe they
Yes.
feel less intimidated by asking another associate as opposed to someone else, who's very experienced. So,
Yeah. And I imagine just like our different cohorts also kind of team up with each other and give
yeah,
advice and guidance. I imagine your classes do the same. So over
yeah,
time, we're building this fabric of connectedness, amongst the writers.
exactly, which will become the future teams, right? They're
Right.
going to be the new leads at some point, and they will all know each other and understand what different people can do and that type of thing. Absolutely. So, what do you think is going well with the program, since you have about a year and a half of experience behind you now?
Right. So many of the things that you've already mentioned, really, the camaraderie, opportunities for learning, but also for teaching, so that the more mature, more experienced medical writers can add this component into their own work-life balance of being able to convey information to the new folks,
Right.
and that's satisfying for them. They feel like they are taking an active part in building the future, and
Right.
we're building a future not only for our team at Merck, but we're building a future for medical writing all the way around.
Absolutely.
Because we want to have people representing our profession who are knowledgeable and skilled, and really bring a presence to their teams, bring knowledge uh, and be able to give advice about documentation. That lifts the entire profession up to a
Absolutely.
different level.
I completely agree with you. And actually, to kind of circle back to the beginning, it's another reason I feel so strongly about this, and want to bring this idea out. And I hope that more groups will begin to build in formal training programs, because really, one of the things I've been shocked about, as we try to hire experienced medical writers, is how many of them are not able to pass tests. So we get people regularly who apply for a position. They have sometimes 10, 15 years of experience doing regulatory writing, and they are not able to pass the tests that we give them. And the tests we do are not complex. Um, and for me, that's a statement about the overall level of many medical writers who are out there working the craft. And I think that having many medical writers out there working at a level that you might consider to be subpar is bad for the morale. It diminishes the value of medical writers in the industry as a whole. If you go into a team and they're kind of a burnt child, and they've worked with medical writers in the past who really didn't do much more than make sure the commas were in the right place, and didn't contribute to the messaging of the document, didn't contribute to pulling the team together and driving the process, all of the things that are in the competency model and are the things that we
Right.
believe in, or even at the level of just understanding how to use lean medical writing
Yes.
appropriately, right? It's one of the things we test for when we test writers applying at Trilogy. And if you have people working below those expectations, they're pulling down the reputation of what medical writing can and should be.
Exactly. Yeah. And so we have a responsibility to do it not only for our own groups, but for the profession as a whole, for industry as a whole. And,
I completely agree with you. So we can see what the benefits are. Where do you think the challenges are? If people were considering setting up programs, what are the points that they might need to be thinking, oh, these are the areas we need to pay attention to?
Yeah, it's a good point. One of the things I think that can be a little frustrating for some of the new starts is that the process goes a little bit slowly. It takes time
Yes.
to learn the regulatory requirements, to understand the science of, your particular product, to learn the tools and to be ready to do things independently.
Mm-hmm.
So people can feel a little impatient, I would guess. And we have to help them, have an engaging educational experience, practice experience, and be ready to also find, smaller things that they can actually do and succeed at to encourage them along the way while they're waiting, to get their hands on that first CSR or whatever.
Whatever it is. I absolutely agree with you. We have exactly the same problem. And I think it's part of the positive in that the people we bring in are ambitious and eager and engaged, right? They're really enthusiastic about this. Yep. And they want to dive in and they want to progress. But unfortunately, it's the you don't know what you don't know conundrum. And we frequently have exactly the same kind of situation and conversations where I say to them, because they often don't have enough to do to keep themselves really busy. And I say, actually enjoy it, because in another 12 months, you're going to be just as busy as the rest of the people around here. So, but what we do is we have like little exercises, bite-sized exercises. So if one of our associates has filled in all the narratives and there's nothing else to do, they can just go and grab one of those. It's kind of like a help yourself type situation, and they can grab an exercise, do it, and then somebody will review it for them afterwards, one of senior management. So we've tried to create things that they can do in those gaps. Another thing we recommend them is if you've done all the exercises or whatever, ask leads if they have a comment resolution meeting coming up, and just go and sit in on the meeting and watch and learn, see how they run those meetings, see the types of questions they ask their teams and how they steer the conversation. Because I think that's an essential part of really learning the craft, because it's not just about writing. A huge part of it is knowing how to handle your teams and knowing how to tease the ideas out of their heads, particularly if they're disagreeing with each other. How do you how do you get to the point that you ultimately want to say in the document? And so we urge people to find leads to shadow during meetings.
That's a great idea. And I think it would be worthwhile to attend lots of different kinds of meetings, kickoff meetings, reviewer orientation meetings, etc. So they can watch skilled people do the project management, do the negotiating, lead without maybe having all the authority.
Exactly. I had a writer once. She'd been working with us for about, I think it was just over a year. And then one day she had said, I don't have anything to do. And I had a big a comment resolution meeting for a dossier that I was working on. And I said, well, just come and sit in the room and listen to me. And at the end of the meeting, she turned around and said, I had no idea you could talk to a team like that. I was like, not only can you should. That's
you must.
Yes. We're not just here to have them tell us what to do, because that kind of defeats the point. We're here to help them know where to go, make advice, make suggestions, be really proactively involved in what's going on. And she said to me, that was such an eye opener, just seeing how you engaged with the team. So yeah, I think that's a really important part of the training that they see wherever, any kind of meeting they can participate in.
I can imagine, Julia, that for some organizations, having junior people who aren't sort of productive could be a challenge. And I personally see it as being such a great investment, though, because as we've been saying, it bolsters the morale of everyone on the team, because it's a message that we're invested in people, we're invested in continual development. And also, as we said, I think, and you've been doing this longer than I have, I'd love to know, do you find that it encourages retention in your department?
It absolutely does. I mean, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because nobody stays at their first job, right?
Right.
We hire people straight out of college. Are they going to stay at the same place for the next 20 years? Highly unlikely. Yeah. You want to progress. You want to have the feeling like you've seen different things, right? The grass is always greener. But we know for a fact, because people tell us, that they stay with Trilogy longer because they really appreciate what they get, the investment that we put into helping them progress, making sure that they have some place to go and that they're always learning. We have this strong internal program, but we also send all our writers every year to either EMWA or AMWA, the European or the American Medical Writers Associations. And it's not just a lucky one or two who get to go, which is the case in many companies.
Yes.
And our writers know that, and they appreciate it. So it absolutely has a direct impact on retention. Yeah.
That's interesting. I take the same approach. I want as many people as possible going to AMWA or AMWA every year.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, that's the community. And by being a part of the medical writing community, you're keeping your finger on the pulse of what's going on. It's not a static world that we live in. Things are constantly changing, interpretation of regulations, new regulations, whatever. And I think if you're not out there talking to other medical writers, hearing how they're handling these new challenges and what different groups are doing, then you're not staying at the forefront of industry. So
yeah, and that's part and parcel of the educational models we're talking about. It's a cultural education as well as practical, craft-wise education.
I agree. So hopefully the future is one where many more companies embrace the idea that, yes, there's an investment there without question. I mean, you hire these people, and even sometimes experienced people, and it's not just the novice ones. There are experienced people who come in and they need some guidance. They might not be as productive as they could be if we train them. But that in the long run, what we're building is a community of real professionals who are widely recognized and respected. And this whole conundrum of, do we bring the clout to the table will just go away, because it'll be the same as, you have to have a statistician, you have to have a well-trained medical writer to make this project work.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. And so it's really important that we have things like this podcast. We have sessions at conferences where we talk about apprenticeship programs and how they can be built. And we have the people themselves speaking about what they've gained from such a program.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, well, let this be a call to the industry to go out and get some more medical writing training programs set up at your companies.
Absolutely. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you, Joan. It was great talking to you today. So thank you for listening to TriloTalk today. If you enjoyed it, please come back and listen to us again. If you have feedback on this or any of our sessions, we would love to hear it. In addition, if you have ideas for future topics that you'd like us to cover, particularly something you think the community should be talking about, let us know. We would like this to be an ongoing conversation with medical writers at large, and you can send us comments on our Twitter feed or on our LinkedIn page. Just a reminder, you can find all our episodes of the TriloTalk podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and trilogywriting.com/TriloTalk. Have a good rest of your day.